What if a series of small missteps, split-second decisions and missed signals turned a routine takeoff into an unimaginable disaster? In the case of Air Florida 90, it wasn't one single failure, but a chain of human and technical errors that led to a catastrophic crash just moments after leaving the ground. Today, we'll dive deep into the cockpit to explore how breakdowns in communication, teamwork, and protocol turned deadly, and what these lessons mean for aviation safety today. Join us as we uncover the crucial mistakes, the warning signs, and the actions that could have changed everything. By the end, you'll have a new perspective on why clear communication and teamwork in high-stakes environments are not just important, they're essential. Ready to discover what really happened? Let's get started. On January 13, 1982, Washington, D.C. was gripped by a brutal winter storm. Snow blanketed the city, and temperatures plunged well below freezing. For Air Florida Flight 90, bound for Fort Lauderdale, Florida, these harsh conditions would pose a major challenge from the very start. The Boeing 737, though equipped for a range of conditions, faced one of the most difficult hazards in aviation: ice. As the aircraft sat on the runway awaiting takeoff clearance, snow and ice began to accumulate on the wings and fuselage. The crew of Flight 90 knew the dangers of flying with ice on the wings. Icing disrupts the smooth airflow over the surface, drastically reducing lift and increasing drag. But as the minutes ticked by and the aircraft continued to idle on the taxiway, layers of snow and ice continued to build up. Earlier, the plane had gone through a standard de-icing process, a procedure critical to clearing ice buildup and ensuring safe takeoff. Yet, due to the weather and the time delay, this initial de-icing effort was already becoming less effective. In the cockpit, pilots debated their course of action. They were eager to take off, but they faced a significant dilemma. Was the aircraft safe to fly in its current condition? Communication between the captain and co-pilot reflected a mix of confidence and caution. While one expressed concern, the other seemed determined to push forward, relying on intuition rather than re-evaluating the condition of the wings or requesting another round of de-icing. Visibility was another major factor. With snowflakes thickening and visibility reducing further, the pilots had limited external cues to assess the buildup on the wings. Instead, they relied heavily on their instruments and each other's judgment. Air Florida 90 was a small commuter flight, but under the surface, pressures to meet schedules and avoid further delays began to influence their decision-making. As clearance finally came, the conditions remained unfavorable, and the aircraft had spent a considerable amount of time exposed to the elements. With ice likely forming in the engines and on the wings, the crew made a choice that would prove disastrous. The stage was now set for a series of missteps, where each seemingly minor decision would contribute to a catastrophic outcome. With the de-icing process complete, Air Florida 90 was given clearance to taxi, but the delays had already begun to undermine the effectiveness of the initial de-icing treatment. The extreme weather continued, with freezing temperatures and relentless snowfall creating the perfect conditions for ice to reaccumulate on the aircraft. As the plane waited in line for takeoff, neither the captain nor the co-pilot requested a second round of de-icing, despite the prolonged delay. In the high-stress environment of the cockpit, they had overlooked a critical factor: the need for continuous monitoring and reassessment in such conditions. Communication between the captain and co-pilot reflected a complex dynamic. While one of them expressed concern about the potential for ice buildup, the other brushed it off, seeming more focused on staying on schedule. This moment of hesitation and difference of opinion foreshadowed a larger issue: the lack of clear, decisive communication. Instead of confidently voicing their concerns, both pilots seemed to hesitate, allowing doubt and second-guessing to cloud their judgment. Outside, the weather conditions were steadily worsening, and the runway had been partially cleared but was still covered with patches of snow and ice. Air Florida 90 was surrounded by visual cues indicating potential danger, yet the pilots continued to rely on the assumption that the initial de-icing had been adequate. The crew did not communicate their concerns with air traffic control or request a re-evaluation of the runway conditions, focusing instead on getting airborne. At one critical point during the wait, the co-pilot mentioned that the indicators seemed a little off. It was an understatement that would later be seen as a missed opportunity for direct action. Rather than probing further or suggesting another de-icing run, the comment lingered without response. The cockpit voice recordings later revealed that both pilots shared concerns but hesitated to escalate them, showing the importance of clear and assertive communication when faced with ambiguous risks. This disconnect wasn't just a communication lapse between the two pilots. It was also a failure to communicate with ground crew and control tower personnel who could have offered support or additional resources. The reluctance to request further assistance and the lack of coordination ultimately left the pilots isolated, working from assumptions rather than data. As Flight 90 neared takeoff, the communication issues had effectively silenced any remaining hesitation. The unspoken concerns and assumptions built on each other, creating a situation where critical steps were skipped and precautions were overlooked. What began as an ordinary de-icing protocol had turned into a ticking clock, and as the engines roared to life, the stage was set for a takeoff under conditions that were anything but safe. With clearance to take off finally granted, the pilots of Air Florida 90 faced a moment of decision that would determine the fate of everyone on board. The captain, eager to make up for lost time, had one thing on his mind: getting the plane off the ground and on its way. Yet the co-pilot had lingering concerns about the aircraft's condition, particularly given the signs of ice buildup they had observed earlier. Despite these concerns, the cockpit atmosphere reflected an unspoken pressure to proceed. As they prepared for takeoff, the captain made a crucial decision. He would push forward without requesting another round of de-icing or a more thorough examination of the aircraft. In their pre-flight briefing, the captain had expressed confidence in their ability to handle the conditions, and as the leader, his decision carried weight. The co-pilot, although uncertain, chose to defer to the captain's judgment. This subtle but significant deference led to a breakdown in communication, as the co-pilot's concerns were left unspoken. The lack of a clear, assertive response from either pilot created an environment of quiet resignation in the cockpit. The pressures of sticking to the schedule, combined with the confidence or perhaps overconfidence of the captain, fostered a false sense of security. Instead of questioning the conditions, they reassured each other that everything would be fine, relying on previous experience rather than the immediate indicators in front of them. The co-pilot's hesitance to assert his perspective on safety precautions became a silent barrier, one that prevented open discussion about the potential risks they were facing. As they began the takeoff roll, the engines responded sluggishly, and the power indicators displayed lower than expected readings. This should have been an immediate red flag, a clear sign that ice was likely obstructing the engines. The co-pilot pointed out the issue, commenting on the engine's slow response, but the captain brushed it off, attributing it to the cold weather. Instead of stopping to verify the readings, the decision was made to continue the takeoff. This moment marked a turning point where urgency overrode caution, and the safety-first approach was left behind. The interplay of authority and hesitation between the two pilots continued to impact each choice they made. The cockpit was a confined space where every word and gesture mattered, yet the deference to authority created a scenario where questions were raised but not pursued. The balance between safety and assertiveness faltered, and with each second, they drew closer to a point of no return. By the time they were airborne, the decisions made during these crucial seconds had set a tragic chain of events into motion. Air Florida 90 was now battling unseen forces: ice on the wings and engines, compromised lift, and a gradual loss of power. The combination of missed signals and quiet compliance left the crew unprepared for the reality they were about to face in the sky. As Air Florida 90 lifted off from the icy runway, the effects of their earlier decisions began to reveal themselves almost immediately. The climb was sluggish, and the controls felt unresponsive, signs that the aircraft was struggling to generate enough lift. Within moments, both pilots noticed that the power readings were lower than they should have been, a direct result of the ice clogging the engines and reducing their efficiency. But now, already airborne, there was little they could do but try to keep the plane steady. In the first seconds of the ascent, the co-pilot again voiced his concern, mentioning the abnormality in engine power. This time, the captain's response was more cautious, as he realized the climb wasn't proceeding as expected. The instruments indicated that they were losing speed, but the captain reassured himself that they'd soon gain the necessary power. The harsh reality was that ice on the wings and engines was preventing the aircraft from achieving the lift it needed, causing a dangerously low climb rate. Their altitude was perilously low, and as the engines continued to struggle, the aircraft began to lose even more power. Instead of climbing, Air Florida 90 was essentially gliding at low altitude, skimming just above the cityscape of Washington, D.C. The crew's earlier decisions, combined with the false reassurance of routine, had brought them to this critical juncture. But as the plane strained against the frozen air, the truth became impossible to ignore. Both pilots realized something was catastrophically wrong, yet with so little altitude, their options were limited. The weight of the icy buildup, the weakened engines, and the low climb speed all converged into a single, urgent threat. Any hope of adjusting their course or correcting their altitude dwindled as the ground below closed in. Their quiet concerns, left unaddressed until the last moments, had sealed their fate. With seconds to react, they found themselves unable to overcome the forces working against them. Air Florida 90 had reached the tipping point, and the next few moments would bring an unthinkable end to what should have been a routine flight. As Air Florida 90 continued its struggle to gain altitude, the situation in the cockpit grew increasingly desperate. The low power output from the engines, coupled with the ice-laden wings, left the plane incapable of climbing to a safe altitude. The pilots now found themselves in a high-stakes scenario where every second counted. Yet instead of taking assertive corrective actions, they remained caught in a web of uncertainty, each decision reinforcing the chain of failures that had started on the ground. The engine indicators showed troubling readings, but the exact cause remained unclear to the pilots. The low thrust and slow climb rate were signs of an engine malfunction or ice buildup, yet they didn't take immediate action to counter the stall. Both pilots exchanged concerns in fragmented phrases, their communication clouded by uncertainty and the mounting stress of the situation. This back-and-forth hesitation further eroded their ability to respond effectively, as crucial moments slipped away with no clear resolution. As the seconds passed, the captain's earlier confidence began to waver. The co-pilot, meanwhile, continued to express concern, but hesitated to fully assert himself, likely influenced by the authority dynamics within the cockpit. This imbalance created a situation where neither pilot took decisive control, each expecting the other to step up and break the cycle of inaction. In aviation, clear and assertive communication is essential, especially under stress. Yet in this moment, the breakdown in communication created a critical gap, leaving them unable to respond effectively to the emergency. Adding to the confusion, the cockpit was filled with warning sounds and flashing indicators that signaled their declining speed and altitude. These were unmistakable cues that the plane was heading toward a stall, yet the pilots seemed unable to process the full gravity of the warnings. The stall warning, a shrill, piercing sound designed to alert pilots to imminent danger, sounded repeatedly, but they struggled to grasp its implications amid the chaos. The breakdown in cockpit resource management meant that, despite having the tools to recognize the crisis, the pilots were effectively paralyzed by indecision. As the aircraft continued its perilous descent, their choices became even more limited. The chain of failures had reached its climax. Neither pilot had asserted the need to increase engine power, and neither had decisively questioned the plane's ability to maintain altitude. They had missed critical opportunities to respond, each mistake compounding the next, creating an unstoppable spiral toward disaster. In those final moments, every decision, or lack thereof, aligned to create a tragic outcome. Air Florida 90 was now on a collision course, and with the engines unable to deliver enough thrust to climb, there was no longer any way to avoid the impact. Their collective hesitation and fragmented communication had culminated in an irreversible descent, sealing the fate of everyone on board. In mere seconds, Air Florida 90's struggle for altitude came to a devastating end. The Boeing 737, unable to gain enough lift due to the accumulated ice and reduced engine power, clipped the 14th Street Bridge over the Potomac River. The impact was catastrophic. The plane struck several vehicles on the bridge, shattering the lives of drivers below, before careening into the frozen Potomac. It broke apart on impact, sending fragments and passengers into the icy water below. For the passengers and crew, the aftermath was a brutal shock. The freezing river posed an immediate threat, trapping survivors in the wreckage or forcing them to fight against the icy currents. Some were immobilized by the cold, while others, disoriented and injured, tried to grasp onto debris. In those first chaotic moments, rescue seemed unlikely. Washington, D.C. was paralyzed by the winter storm, and emergency response teams struggled to reach the crash site through blocked and snow-covered roads. Witnesses on the bridge and nearby riverbanks, shocked by the sudden disaster, alerted authorities and began attempts to help. But the freezing temperatures made even the simplest rescue efforts treacherous. Within minutes, helicopters arrived, dropping lifelines to the survivors who clung to the plane's wreckage. Among these survivors, one man famously passed lifeline after lifeline to others before succumbing to exhaustion and disappearing beneath the water. The selfless acts of the rescuers and survivors would later become iconic symbols of heroism in the face of unimaginable tragedy. The crash claimed 78 lives, including passengers, crew, and individuals on the bridge. What should have been a routine flight had transformed into a tragic chapter in aviation history. A powerful reminder of the unforgiving consequences that come from a chain of seemingly small decisions gone wrong. In the wake of the Air Florida 90 crash, investigators from the National Transportation Safety Board, NTSB, launched a comprehensive investigation to uncover how such a tragic series of failures could have unfolded. The icy conditions, engine performance issues, and cockpit communication were all examined in detail, but one finding stood out among the rest. The crash was not caused by a single catastrophic failure, but by a combination of human errors, communication breakdowns, and missed opportunities to address warning signs. One of the primary factors was the crew's decision to proceed with takeoff despite inadequate de-icing and poor visibility. The investigation revealed that although the aircraft had initially been de-iced, the prolonged wait on the runway and continued snow had allowed ice to reaccumulate on the wings and in the engines. This buildup, undetected by the pilots due to their limited visibility, compromised the aircraft's performance significantly. The NTSB concluded that better de-icing protocols and clearer guidelines for extreme weather conditions could help prevent similar incidents in the future. The investigation also highlighted the importance of effective communication and assertive decision-making in the cockpit. The captain's confidence and the co-pilot's reluctance to challenge authority had led to an environment where critical concerns were left unspoken. This dynamic exposed the need for improved cockpit resource management, CRM training, emphasizing open communication, teamwork, and assertiveness among crew members. As a result, CRM programs were revamped to encourage co-pilots to speak up when safety is at stake, regardless of rank. Another crucial change involved updating training on icing conditions and engine performance, particularly under extreme weather. Airlines were required to increase emphasis on recognizing ice-related hazards, including how to detect subtle signs of ice buildup and the potential effects on engine power. These adjustments underscored a shift in the industry's understanding of how environmental factors interact with human decision-making in high-stakes scenarios. The lessons learned from Air Florida 90 shaped aviation safety regulations worldwide. The crash was a sobering reminder that even small misjudgments, when compounded, can lead to catastrophic outcomes. By addressing these failures, the aviation industry took meaningful steps toward preventing similar tragedies, establishing stronger safeguards to ensure that future flights would not suffer the same fate. This chain of missteps underscored the critical importance of clear communication, assertiveness, and vigilance in aviation. Every voice in the cockpit matters, and each decision can be a turning point in ensuring passenger safety. If this story resonated with you, consider sharing it to raise awareness about the vital role of teamwork in high-stakes environments. Together, we can honor the lives lost by understanding the lessons learned and supporting a safer future in the skies.